Such is My Beloved, Canadiana, by Miriam Pereira. Morley Callahan was a Canadian author of novels, short stories, and plays. He was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, on February 22, 1903. He received an education in law, but spent most of his time writing literary works and working at the Daily Star. He was known for his short stories and novels, which mostly hinted at Roman Catholic themes. The first novel he ever wrote was Strange Fugitive in 1928. He was married to a woman named Loretta D., and they had 2 sons together. He passed away at the age 87 in 1990 from illness and was buried in Mount Hope Catholic Cemetery in Ontario. Such is My Beloved takes place during the Great Depression in Toronto, Ontario. The story follows a young, ardent, and somewhat naive priest, Father Stephen Dowling. He preaches at the pulpit with such conviction that the bishop is afraid that he will drive away the congregation. While out walking one night, Father comes across 2 prostitutes, of whom he feels obligated to help. He goes to great lengths in aiding them, giving them money, buying them clothes. In helping them, he soon grows to love them both passionately. He becomes obsessed with helping them, and the 2 girls are constantly on his mind. Some of the more snobbish members of the church do not approve of Father Dowling's love for the girls. Even the bishop starts to worry about him, seeing how consumed he is by the girls. The girls are eventually arrested for prostitution, and, as a result, Father is driven mad with remorse, feeling like he had failed the girls. The bishop ends up cutting Father Dowling off from the church and sending him to an insane asylum. There, the priest makes his final sacrifice by offering up his sanity to the Lord in the hope that the souls of the prostitutes might be saved. The greatest conflict of the story is Father Dowling trying to redeem the 2 prostitutes, trying to get them off the streets. After first meeting them, he tries to give them the decency he would any regular parishioner. His love for them is quickly deepened into divine love, and he tries to show the girls that they do not need to be on the streets. He stays with them late into the night so that they miss the opportunity to go on the streets. He buys them clothes and gives them money. He comes to dote on the girls. Once the girls are arrested for prostitution, he despairs about what else he can do to help them. In the end, he ends up offering up his sanity to God so that their souls might be saved. Canada, in the novel, is portrayed as a poor and sort of sketchy place, with a very pronounced line separating poor people and wealthy people. This is mostly due to the setting of the story, the Great Depression. At the time, there was a great number of people without jobs, and even those with jobs oftentimes lived in a state of poverty. Families with many children were hit especially hard during the Great Depression, as the more mouths that needed to be fed, the more expensive it was. Midge, having many siblings, left home and made her way to Toronto, where she thought it might be more prosperous. As it turns out, Toronto was no better than Montreal. The author describes much of the city to be a dark and gritty place, using dark imagery to describe the streets. The culture of Canada portrayed by characters in the book is a very sneaky and secretive atmosphere. The characters are polite to each other's faces, but behind their backs, they are absolutely ruthless. She folded her hands piously across her chest. "Ah, poor child, it's a great pity. Now, if you just say a little prayer, if you would just think of me occasionally." Midge smiled slightly. They had often mocked the priest this way. Callahan, 1043. Today, Canada is much more prosperous. There is less poverty than there was during the Great Depression, though there are still many homeless people lining the streets of Toronto. Toronto is cleaner than what was depicted in the novel, and there are many more job opportunities in Canada now than there were when the story took place. People living in Canada now no longer find jobs out of necessity to their survival. Citizens of Canada in modern times find occupations based on their interests. In fact, they even pay for the education to have the job that they want. In the novel, some scenes are particularly tense between some characters who are afraid of the judgment and scorn their opinions might bring about. Canada today is much more outspoken and accepting of different ideas. Morley Callahan is a descriptive writer, meaning that most of what goes on in the book is in the characters' heads. Very little is actually said through dialogue. Rather, he uses the thoughts and feelings of the characters to tell the story. The author also leaves much of the story up for interpretation, leaving many things unresolved, which is a very common theme among Canadian authors. For example, we never actually find out what becomes of the two prostitutes, or whether the bishop confesses if he was in the wrong during confession. Midge and Ronnie were often prime examples of the author's use of colloquialism, likely because he wanted to create a defined line between those who lived in poverty without an education and more wealthy people who could afford education, who did not use colloquialism. I know the way you're feeling. You ain't no trouble." Callahan, 1105. Morley's use of imagery in the book is truly captivating. When the author describes most things at the girls' hotel or on the streets, they are usually described with the use of darker diction. A broken electric sign with only a few of the letters lighted dimly, swung in the wind over the narrow hotel entrance. Callahan, 120. Or when he is describing the innocent or naive things, he uses lighter diction, such as when he describes Father Dowling to be white-faced. The author himself was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, during the early 1900s. The book was published a couple of decades after the Great Depression struck Canada in the 1930s. Morley wanted to present Canada in his novel likely to depict how the Great Depression affected common people in Toronto at the time. Or the novel may have been a way for the author to relive the past by speaking through personal experience.